everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life and No Bullshit Bodybuilding, and today I'd like to talk to you about why I abandoned bro splits. And this video has been a long time coming in that it's in reference to a decision I made at the very beginning of this year, and if I'm honest with myself, there's been a need for me to speak more openly and directly with you about topics about which I've changed my mind, both because I don't want people to think I believe something I didn't that I believed 2 or 3 years ago, but also as a matter of intellectual honesty, I need to be able to say, this is what I thought, I no longer think it, I think I was wrong about that, and here's why. So to speak to this particular topic, because I do think within the realm of fitness, bodybuilding in particular, the debate regarding training frequency is an important one and significant. So I thought this would be an apt place to start. The condensed answer is I changed my mind about this earlier this year because I felt that the best available evidence as a whole indicated bro splits were an inferior means of optimizing hypertrophy in natural bodybuilders. So now those of you who have extreme ADD like myself might want to just leave it there. But to back up and provide more context so that perhaps there's more substance to this response, when I first started, ironically, when I first started training in early 2008, for really the entirety of that year, I trained very similarly to how I train now, at least in terms of my training split. I did, for many, many months, I vividly recall doing a lower upper, but I was actually hitting my lower body 3 days a week and my upper body 2 or 3 days a week, so it was a very lower body dominant program. It was lower body dominant, let's say. I definitely could have made it more lower body dominant, but I was squatting and deadlifting 3 days a week and benching twice a week, doing pull downs and so on twice a week. And the result was I gained strength extremely rapidly early on. I think I could have gained much more muscle. I think part of that was I had not developed, for lack of a better term, I don't really have a problem with this term, in fact, mind-muscle connection. I vividly recall doing movements and not really feeling muscles working. It was just, okay, I'm doing a pull down, etc. And again, that's the way I trained for probably a solid year, year and a half initially. Again, I gained a bunch of strength. Indeed, I was stronger on at least the deadlift than I am now, given I don't do it now. So you might find it interesting that when I was 30 or 40 pounds lighter, and a lot of that difference is muscle mass, I was much stronger on a deadlift than I am now. So that speaks to this question of strength and hypertrophy, which is not the topic of this video. But when my family lived outside of London at the time, when we moved back to the States in 2009, it was in that period where I shifted fairly rapidly in the direction of bro splits, overwhelmingly because of the influence of Jay Cutler. I've always been a huge fan of his. Just found him a really likable guy. He seems someone who genuinely cares about his fans. I mean, I've gotten back into his stuff recently. He just strikes me as someone who actually gives a shit. And I think I latched on to what he was doing, lacking the experience and knowledge to be able to put that in the context of, okay, he's the elite of the genetic elite and is using heavy supplements, and thus what he does, I can learn from what he does, but I shouldn't simply take that and do that, because what that means is what I do in terms of training may well be suboptimal or very suboptimal for me, and if I just do what he does dietarily, that's probably not going to pan out well for me either. And indeed what happened was I got extremely fat doing the Jay Cutler bulking thing. He, in his prime, I'm thinking 2003 to 2007, he talked about how his off-season diet was 350 grams of protein, 1,000 grams of carbs, etc. So I remember, I thought the way to get huge was 700, 1,000 grams of carbs per day, and the result was there was a period in which I gained a ton of fat, and this put me in the position in 2010 of needing to cut for, I'm not sure about needing to cut, but I ended up cutting for about 8 to 10 months. I was really satisfied with where I ended up, but I was really fat to begin with. Maybe I can make a whole video discussing that in the future, but that's where the bro split idea came from. So I did that really from the second half of 2009 until beginning of 2016. Now, changes definitely happened in that period. I think early on it was more or less exactly what Jay was doing. I remember even trying to find the same equipment, etc., and sometimes that was problematic because not all gyms have the same equipment. And I think fairly early on, there were kind of whispers in my mind that this wasn't the best way to go about everything. As an example, I remember I would do the 20 or 30 set back workouts, and there got to be a point where I was like, it really feels as though after 4, 5, 6 exercises, I'm not stimulating any additional muscle growth. And this was a period in which I didn't read research, I wasn't on YouTube, I don't think I was aware of really any of the folks in the evidence-based community except for Layne Norton, and I'm not sure how much I had even dug into his material at that time, although I know that this is something he talked about. And so that was purely me in the gym. I was doing this over and over again and starting to develop the sense of, okay, this high volume form of bro splits maybe isn't the best way to go. Similarly, I would do many sets for quads and a leg workout, and I got to the point where I was like, I more or less can't move, like I can't contract my quads by the end of this workout. Is this last exercise really making a difference? But that wasn't, I don't think that was a big enough sense that that didn't cause me to feel that the overall approach was not ideal. So I made changes but kept the basic construct. And the next change was starting to condense things in terms of, okay, do I really need to have a dedicated chest session? So I remember thinking as far back as 2009, my delts are a weak point. They still are, probably always will be. I thought, okay, I have a dedicated chest workout. Do I really need that? Okay, I'll do chest, and then I'll do a bunch of lateral raises afterwards. And I thought that that was really, I don't know why the word exotic is the word that came to mind, but I thought that was that was pushing it. You know, I have a chest workout and then laterals, but I also have a shoulder day. Ooh, like this is gonna blow up my delts. So it gives you a sense of where I was in terms of my views on training frequency at the time. And so I remember doing that. I remember having a sense that, okay, Jay and Phil train weak points twice a week, so that's something that I did to some extent fairly early on. I started combining chest and shoulder workouts, things like this. And I think in 2014, because obviously at some point 5 years ago I got on YouTube, at some point people started, asking questions about this, like, why are you doing bro splits? This isn't what the evidence indicates, etc. And I would note that in this period I was still not nearly where I am now, and I don't even really regard myself as this super impressive guy who reads tons of research, but I take that tremendously more seriously than I did in the past. And I would also note, and I'll get to this, that a lot of the relevant research didn't exist yet. But again, around early 2014, actually, as far back as late 2012, I remember making a video talking about bro splits and defending them, giving some arguments as to why they might be a good approach. Truthfully, I don't recall exactly what my arguments were. Probably you're better able to focus on individual body parts. Adherence they might be more fun. Adherence is very important, etc. That's about the extent of what I remember at this point. And funnily, that's such a questionable word, funnily enough, I don't recall getting a lot of critical feedback, even including just respectful disagreement at that point. But I remember in 2014 there started being more in the way of, why are you doing this? This is not the way to go. And then it really went to the next level in 2015. Maybe that was reflective of some of the new studies Brad Schoenfeld was doing. Maybe it was just a function of who was following me at that time. I don't recall exactly. But I vividly recall lengthy discussions I had about this with gentlemen like Evan Godby, Tim Rowland. These are guys I really respect in the evidence-based community. Disagreed with both, particularly Tim, I've disagreed with a lot. But I think, I'm able to look back and say in hindsight, I think deep down intuitively, it was at that point where I really started to get a sense of, shit, like I'm on the wrong side of this. The phrase which comes to mind is, on the wrong side of history. One hears this in the context of, well, if you're opposed to gay marriage, you're on the wrong side of history. Again, I think deep down I started to get a feeling of like, this line of argumentation is losing, but I simply wasn't at the point in terms of intellectual honesty and maturity to be able to say that really. Or maybe I didn't even, I don't think I could even articulate to myself at that point that that's where I was. It was more so, this is what Evan's saying, this is what Tim and there were other people as well are saying, yeah, but, you can get more volume with a bro split and things like, I continued giving arguments for this, and part of it was honest error on my part in that Brad Schoenfeld has done two frequency studies, but one of them was intended to be a frequency study. The other was the 2014 quote powerlifting bodybuilding study, which looked at volume equated 7 sets of 3 and 3 sets of 10, and the frequencies were different. Looked at hypertrophy, and that study was done, and then that was published in 2014. A similar study where, if I recall correctly, the number of sets, reps, exercises were identical. The distribution throughout the week was different. And given I'm going from memory here, I haven't read either of those studies recently. In one of the studies, hypertrophy was not significantly different. In the other, it was, if I recall correctly. I believe in the latter, I should say later study, the 2015 study, hypertrophy was significantly higher in the higher frequency group, and then in the previous study there was a difference but it didn't reach significance. It's either that or vice versa. I remember, I don't think I actually read the study, but I knew of the study and I had honestly misremembered the results, and I vividly remember discussing this with Tim Rowland, and I was under the impression like neither of these studies, which looked at different frequencies, and by the way they're well-designed studies, neither of them showed statistically significant differences in hypertrophy. I was like, this is pretty much the best available evidence on this question, regardless of kind of mechanistic arguments to do with protein synthesis and so on. And I was simply wrong about that. What I thought the study said was not what the study said. And that was that particular discussion I had with Tim that I really remember was last summer. And I don't recall even really much thinking or discussing this topic between then and very late 2015. Still using bro splits through this period, and what I had kind of done, I kind of half-assed a higher frequency approach. I vividly recall I did this for several months. Legs, chest, shoulders, back, and arms, repeat. Almost never took rest days in this period. That started a trend that's largely continued this year, almost never taking rest days. And so frequency was significantly higher than a typical bro split where you're hitting everything once a week. I was hitting everything once every 4 days, and my thought, again, not yet being in a position that I'm not 100% in now, but closer to being in now, where I'm really able to have the internal dialogue of, hey man, you're just wrong about this. Like, I'm much better able to do that now. I was somewhat successfully accounting for the evidence in the direction of higher frequencies, but I think I was still emotionally attached to doing bro splits. It sounds totally absurd now that I actually say that, but whether it was, I had done this for so long, I'm not going to totally abandon this concept that I've used for really 6 years. I did, for a long time I did really enjoy bro splits. I think at some point that maybe just due to repetition, I got to the point where that wasn't the case nearly as much. But whatever the exact psychological reason, rather than simply saying, okay, let's just throw out everything and ask the question from scratch, what's the best way to train? Just pretend like I haven't even done all of this, I have no bias. let's just start from nothing, let's even ask the question, should you do more than one set per workout? Given all of the options, should you train a muscle once, twice, 3, 7 times a week, etc.? I was trying to assimilate and account for new information without being willing to simply throw out the methodology, which in hindsight I think was unavoidably suboptimal. And interestingly, the straw that broke the camel's back for me, which is really only a narrative of where I was psychologically, it isn't reflective of the evidence, was Menno Hanselmans. I recently interviewed, really bright guy, extremely knowledgeable. He's like an encyclopedia when it comes to both exercise science and nutrition research. There was something called the Epic Fitness Summit last year where he and about 15 other top guys presented on a variety of topics. His presentation was, I think, on training frequency and nutrient timing. And this was filmed and this was uploaded and it was put on the Epic Fitness Summit YouTube channel. And one of the things he discussed was, I think it was fairly recent, I'm not sure about that, but a study in which it was shown that the elevation in muscle protein synthesis, which is even a little bit of a misstatement, I think what we really mean by that is the increase in the total amount of dietary protein that can be used to synthesize muscle protein after training. In one particular study, the period in which that was increased was on average 10 hours in length. And I remember watching that and just thinking, shit, like that just that was again the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like how can there was no, I really felt that there was no way that it was not even in the realm of what I could do as a rational human being to continue doing bro splits at that time. And again, that's a narrative on how I felt at that time. That is not itself indicative of the evidence, but that's how I felt about it. So I went all in, the next day basically. And interestingly, that was January 3rd or something of this year, I think. And I did what I described earlier in this video, what I should have done earlier. I just threw out everything and said, all right, I'm just going to do daily full bodies now. All in. And interestingly, it worked out really well in the sense that I gained strength extremely quickly. I gained muscle much more quickly than I had, in any short period in the previous years. And I was like, okay, so this works. This is what I should have been doing. This is a legitimate option, etc. What I didn't do, because I just went all in on it and didn't take a period to, whether it's a good or bad thing, I'm not someone to say, okay, this is a good idea. I'll spend the next week debating it, and I was much more of, one of my favorite quotes is Thomas Jefferson saying, never leave until tomorrow something you can do today. So my thought was, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. And I was still integrating a lot of what I had done with bro splits because that's what my experience had been for the previous, 6 years. So what that meant was, after about 6 or 8 weeks, I was just consistently exceeding my realistic, sustainable recovery capacity. And I made adjustments to what I was doing. I was more conservative in making changes to the full body approach than I was in just throwing out bro splits once I had made the decision to do that. So I pulled back on volume in individual sessions in terms of body parts, etc. Finally, I made the determination that, okay, this is a legitimate option. It's something that can be done, extremely effective with strength gains, at least in the short term. But it just really didn't feel right for me in terms of, sorry about that, literally ran out of space. I was saying that in the latter third or half of those full body workouts, I just wasn't able to apply myself in the way I wanted to what it was I was trying to do. I do think I probably could have found a way to further adjust what I was doing and say, or salvage that concept, but my feeling was, okay, I've gone from not really one extreme, but closer to one extreme to very near the opposite extreme. I say not literally the other extreme because one can go even higher frequency. One can do what Menno's discussed he had a client do, where he had her training everything every day, twice a day. So my feeling was, okay, let me try higher frequency, much higher frequency relative to what I was doing, but more conservative than this. So I think I shifted at that point to 3 times a week, upper lower, so hitting everything 3 days a week. Indeed, a lot of the time I still wasn't taking rest days. And then, as a result of a discussion I had with Evan Godby, funnily enough, we had this whole discussion via Snapchat. He mentioned that in his experience, lower upper, lower upper, lower upper felt a bit lower body dominant. And I saw where he was coming from in terms of there being more muscles to hit in the upper body. So I tried something per his suggestion, which was lower upper, upper, lower upper, upper, literally meaning the entire lower body and then the whole upper body 2 days in a row, and then do that, repeat that. And I found that probably the best balance of all training variables, given I'm slightly lower body dominant and wanted to improve a lot of my upper body. And ultimately I found that the limiting factor there was, for one thing, I have a nagging overuse injury right where my right lat originates. Had that for at least 2 full years now. And given I was hitting my lats hard 4 or 5 days a week, particularly 2 days in a row, and then I would repeat that, and that overuse injury was exacerbated. And there just came a point where that approach was no longer fresh. And so what I switched back to more recently was lower upper, lower upper, lower upper. And what I've done most recently is lower upper, lower upper, lower upper, and then laid on top of that high volume direct arms training every day. Previously I had done something similar with calf training, and continuing to do that, really enjoying it, found it to be really effective. So, one concern I had in filming this video is that it would provide you with almost no actionable content. It would just be another video of Ian McCarthy fucking talking endlessly about whatever. And I'm very cognizant that that's a concern people have, or a feeling people have about my content, and really tried to shift away from that and make every video or every piece of content in some way something that you can take and then apply. So what are the takeaways from this? First of all, I think you need to be not literally every day all the time, because that would be paralyzing, but it's important that periodically you step back and look at your own views and assumptions, the stuff that you just think like blatantly obvious, and really try to tear it down and see if it stands up to scrutiny. Now, I don't think, I kind of wonder if anyone's really capable of doing an amazing job of that, but I think you need to make a genuine effort to do that. Because perhaps had I done that in the case of the training frequency question in 2015 or something, or even further back, I would have made the kind of decisions I did earlier this year way earlier on, and I would be in a better position, and I would have potentially made better gains, had been stronger, and, not have gotten wrong what I did. Not that it's really like a huge deal that I got it wrong, but had I audited myself, I would have been able to catch that earlier. So that, I think, is hugely important and applies to tremendously more than just how often do you consume protein, how often should you train. That's stuff like, what are your political views? Do you think God exists? Do you think that physical punishment is an effective means of disciplining children? It's like all kinds of stuff that where I see people say things about it where they've clearly made strong assumptions that I wonder if they were to step back and really challenge those, the things where once again they're just like, how could you possibly challenge that? It's just blatantly obvious. I wonder if they'd still hold their views. Now maybe they would, maybe you make a really genuine, you do a really genuine audit, you take your own views and very deliberately try to tear them down, and you're like, nah, actually I still think that's correct. Well, maybe it's just correct, but maybe it isn't, and maybe you'll catch that, and maybe it won't be someone else doing that for you, and you'll avoid, again, going back to that phrase, being on the wrong side of history, although that sounds disproportionate given a lot, this particular discussion. Additionally, with regard to the question of training frequency, so let's move away from kind of philosophy and intellectual honesty and being objective, etc. I don't feel there is the right way. I think it's very important to say that with almost anything, meal frequency, should you do cardio, how much cardio should you do, how much should you sleep, etc. These are very dependent on the individual and the context in which the individual is operating. However, I do think with training frequency, most people, most of the time, are going to do best with higher training frequency, meaning higher than 1 time a week. Probably 2 or 3 times a week. So I think, the person who is a really busy businessman and, they want to make gains, but they have 4 children, they're married and they have 4 children, and they work in corporate America, and they also have their side gig, etc. And they are able to train 4 days a week for 45 minutes. Okay, probably a really good candidate for lower upper. Once again, not saying that's the way to go, but that would probably be in the neighborhood of ideal for that person. And similarly, you might have someone who's a professional natural pro bodybuilder. They're busy with other things, but not as busy. They can train for an hour and a half per day. They can train every day. They really want to prioritize making gains. That person would probably respond really well to a lower upper. So notice how 2 very different scenarios, but you have 2 times a week frequency and 3 times a week frequency. And I think that most people in most contexts, if they approach this very objectively and try to ask the question of what is ideal, they'll land with higher frequencies, but not super high frequencies. And so that speaks to being aware of the context you're in, making decisions on that basis, but also just approaching the research objectively and realizing that they're in the realm of questions of training frequency. I think there is such a thing as a good general recommendation, which would be 2 to 3 times a week per body part typically. If you have a really strong body part that you're perhaps wanting to deliberately deprioritize, I could see having someone go lower. And I can definitely see going higher, even much higher, if someone's really wanting to maximize hypertrophy for a given body part in a particular time frame. And I'm definitely someone who feels that this is a variable that you can manipulate given all these other variables. So I'm not someone who would say just high frequency all the time, regardless of context, let's not vary it, etc. So general point of view, tend toward higher frequencies, meaning 2 to 3 times a week generally, and you can go even higher if you really want to prioritize stuff, if your schedule allows for it, etc. And I would note that this doesn't even get into questions of strength, because that's largely outside of the scope of that which I'm genuinely very interested in and thus know a lot about. But I think it's worth mentioning, at least in this video as a bit of an aside, that I think the balance of evidence would indicate that folks training for strength would have an advantage in training with higher frequencies as well. I think even more so, in fact, than people training for hypertrophy. So, I think that about exhausts my thoughts on this at this time. So, thank you so much for your time, if you managed to make it this far. If you found value in this video, please hit the like button. Feel free to comment below. By the way, I really appreciated the discussion on the last video. Honestly, it struck me that it seemed like everyone commenting already knew what I was talking about. Maybe that's not a good thing, maybe in terms of what it was I was discussing, but I definitely appreciated the dialogue with folks. And so please comment. I encourage you to do so. Share this video with anyone who you think might benefit from it. And I think that's all. So it was suggested that I end all videos like this from here on out. This is the signature. I'll see you guys next time. Can't speak English.